Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us, and welcome to the second annual forum sponsored by Hillsdale College and Talkers Magazine. And I want to thank all the folks at Hillsdale College for helping make this possible, and welcome you for coming out in the middle of a busy day when there are so many things in Washington, D.C. that take up people's time and attention, let alone your jobs. To join us for this opportunity to talk about some of the hottest issues of our time. My name is Michael Harrison. It's my privilege to moderate this panel. And it's being described as a discussion and a debate. I hope it's more on the side of discussion than debate, especially considering how volatile some of the topics we'll be discussing have proven to be during this chaotic period of history. The title of the panel is Media and Journalism in the Age of Trump. And here we are, a little more than 1 year past the last time we gathered. Some of the members of this panel were there. There are some new ones joining us this time. It was the issues attendant to the election of 2016. We still did not know who the winner would be. And it was a spirited discussion, to say the least. Now that we are almost 1 year into the age of Trump, each of the people on this panel being in one way or another a radio and or media talk show host, there are lots of opinions about the effect of Donald Trump's presidency upon journalism and the media. My perspective politically is First Amendment. That's as far as I go. I do everything I possibly can not to express a partisan or consistent ideological position other than my zealous support of the First Amendment and the Constitution of the United States. I have to grapple with what I consider to be legitimate opinions because as a human being, especially lately, but I've experienced this throughout my 50-year career in this business, even the most hardy supporters of the First Amendment do find themselves sometimes facing crises in terms of who they're going to support and what they will support under certain conditions. So I sort of defined for myself the word legitimate opinions, and I realize that that's somewhat of a cop-out, but it's the best I can do, and I try to be sincere in adhering to that. Everybody on this panel has a legitimate opinion as that they express on a daily basis in their writings, on video, and on the radio airwaves, both on air and online. And no longer in 2017 can you make the assumption that somebody is a liberal or a conservative and then presume what that means. And you can't even presume what it means, let alone on a long, consistent level in terms of the timeline. You can't presume what it means hour to hour. The news cycle is so fast these days that most people in the news business are on overload. It's like going warp 10 on a starship that only goes warp 9 and at best will fall apart. I've got it going as fast as I can. No, more news, more stories. When I occasionally fill in on the radio as a talk show host, I try to do at least 5 or 6 stories at the same time, as opposed to doing any one, because by the time you're finished with a show, the one story you started might now be obsolete. That's also played havoc with our heads in terms of time. As we all get older, time seems to go quicker. Today, whether you're old or young, time is very difficult to wrap your brain around. A story that breaks on a Monday, by Wednesday or Thursday or Friday, it feels like it happened a month ago. And this is also something that makes it very difficult for journalists who are committed to seeking truth as opposed to victory, because the pertinence of your story plays such a role in the commercialization and the corporate strategies of today's media. So I will introduce the panel, but I will leave you with one thought. Perhaps we should make it our motto, if we really are sincere about being good media people and true journalists, that we shouldn't succumb to the present tendency in our culture certainly beyond journalism, to seek victory at the expense of truth, but to seek truth at the expense, if necessary, of victory. Our panel consists, and I'm just going to introduce everybody very quickly. Dom Giordano is to my immediate left. He hosts mid-mornings in Philadelphia at WPHT, major radio station and a major radio personality. His background is in education, and he has established himself as one of the leading talk show hosts in America. Next to him is Joe Madison, consistently in the Talkers magazine Heavy 100 Top 10. He is called by his listeners and his constituents the Black Eagle. I know Joe for over 25 years, used to work with him on the same station at WWRC in Washington, and I'm in awe of his career and his role not just as a radio performer, but a civil rights and social activist. He's with SiriusXM Satellite Radio, heard in the morning. To his left is Janet Parshall, who is the preeminent talk show host in America for more than a quarter of a century, representing the secular Christian political news talk point of view, and she does that daily on the Moody Radio Network. Next to Janet is John Fredericks. John Fredericks is an entrepreneur. He began his own network in Virginia and now covers major stations across the state of Virginia with his show on what is called the John Fredericks Radio Network. He was the chairman, is chairman the word? The chairman of the Trump campaign in Virginia. He was one of the first major media figures to say Trump would win. And he, I would say, is probably the most vocal, ardent supporter of the President of the United States, Donald Trump, and expresses that every day. So he will play an important role in this discussion. To his left is a man who left day-to-day talk radio, where he was a big star in the Midwest, in the Chicago area for a number of years in the mornings, and went to academia. He is the general manager of the radio station and the radio program at Hillsdale College, and can provide us with very good insights to the younger generation and the future of broadcasting, and that's Scot Bertram. Next to Scot Bertram, we have a gentleman who's no stranger to anybody who follows the press and follows the media and follows politics. He's read by thousands of people across the country for his weekly column, provided by, I believe, Tribune News content. And he is a pioneer in online broadcasting, a liberal who did not succumb to being pushed out of terrestrial radio by the tendency for them to go for conservative news talkers. And he is heard on the TYT Radio Network, has a huge following. Every day for his show is Bill Press. And to the left of Bill Press is a gentleman who was on last year's panel, a man I've gotten to know over the years, who I respect tremendously as a journalist and as a talk show host, as a lawyer, and as a scholar. The Trump era has been good to him and challenging to him, I'm sure. Played a major role during the primaries in terms of media, and continues to be a voice of tremendous amount of intelligence and reason, and that is Hugh Hewitt. So let's welcome our panelists. Fake news, think about that. There's a term that has changed over the years. Hugh, what happens when I say the word fake news? What goes on in your mind? Just the sound of those words.
Thank you, Michael, and thanks to Hillsdale for having us. Hillsdale receives no federal funding, so we each get one glass of water. Did you notice that? You forgot to mention one thing. The hashtag is Hewitt is funnier than press. All right, that's what we just want you to put out there.
And you're both funnier than Dennis Prager.
Prager, that's the second hashtag, and they're both funnier than Prager. The fake news brings to mind a Bulgarian young man who was interviewed during the 2016 cycle, who knows he is producing fake content 100% of the time and does it to make money. And so he sits in Bulgaria and he produces inflammatory false news about both parties in the United States, and he pushes it out under pseudo persuasive banner headlines international, almost Tribune, something or other, and it, in column form, and it looks like news, and people fall for it all the time because on Twitter, unless you check, you can be tricked, and he makes a lot of money. So for me, the definition is any sort of media put out on any platform that is known to the purveyor to be false. That's fake news. There's a lot of it. It's a very great danger. In 2004, I wrote a piece for the Weekly Standard called Black Blog Ops, which suggested it was only a matter of time till Carla, who's the famed agent in the Le Carré novels, would begin to use online means to influence the election, and it has come to pass in the last 2 years that it's ubiquitous.
Now, John Fredericks, you heard what Hugh Hewitt has just said, and during the past year, I have watched, and I think we have all watched, the evolution of the term fake news to become a favorite term of the President of the United States. Some say he's co-opted the term, and now it means anything that is put out by the mainstream media that he doesn't agree with. How do you respond to that perception?
Well, thanks for having me, Michael, and thanks for Hillsdale College and everyone being here. Let me define fake news. The majority of the editorial and other news coverage in the New York Times, Washington Post, MSNBC, CNN, Los Angeles Times, I could take up the whole panel time for doing this. If you look at CNN or MSNBC, which both Joe and Bill and I are on, and you all the time, you turn CNN on today for the preceding 24 hours straight, all you're going to get on CNN is basically Trump sucks. That's their panel. That's all they do. If it rains out, Trump caused the rain. So maybe they have certain things that they're reporting on, but they don't talk about any of the positive things about the economy or any of the accomplishments that the administration has. All they want to focus on is why Trump is bad, why he's going to be impeached, obstruction of justice, Michael Flynn flipped, etc. And so that is the definition of fake news. You're not turning anything on anymore and getting an honest assessment of what is actually going on in the United States. And what we found, and what those in the Trump administration have to deal with every day, is that the legacy media has one objective, and that is to bring this administration down in any means or way possible. That is my definition of today's.
Thank you, John. Bill Press, what's your reaction to what John just said?
Thank you, Michael. Thank you all for being here. What a surprise. I disagree. Actually, my definition of fake news is anything Donald Trump says, or anything you see on Fox and Friends. I find it in my radio studio in the morning, we have 3 monitors with the morning shows on. The sound is down. By the way, little tip, the best way to watch television is with the sound down. I find you know what they're talking about because you can read the captions. You just don't have to hear the bullshit that either side is saying. But I'm always stunned in the morning to see Fox and Friends and CNN and MSNBC and the difference in what they're covering. And there could be some major breaking news event. Maybe Michael Flynn might be indicted and plead guilty. And you will see that on CNN, you'll see that on MSNBC. And Fox and Friends is probably talking about the Christmas decorations at the White House and how beautiful, what a beautiful job Melania did. I'm not saying she didn't do a beautiful job. I'm saying maybe that's not the biggest story of the day. But I think that Hugh is right. There is, let's get away from the White House for just a second. There is so much fake news going around, particularly online. I think that's a danger to all of us in our profession because a lot of people see that, they believe it, they don't have the filters to know what's real and what's not. And that's all they get. But I think it's certainly amplified when the President of the United States has, and I didn't think this was going to be a partisan debate, but if John sort of started it off, but I think it's amplified when the President of the United States has zero regard for the truth. One little example, he came out in front of the media yesterday on his way into Marine One, and said, I feel sorry for Michael Flynn. He lied to the FBI, and he got caught, and he's going to pay the punishment or whatever. Hillary Clinton lied to the FBI many times, and she walked free. There's zero evidence of that, and I'm not here as a Hillary defender. I'm a Bernie guy. But zero evidence she ever lied to the FBI. And James Comey, in fact, the director of the FBI, testified under oath in Congress at the end of the email investigation where he criticized her for having that private email server, said, I find absolutely zero basis to say that she lied to the FBI.
All right, Bill, I'm going to jump in at this point.
So that's my fake news.
Suffice it to say, what you're saying is that one of the sources of fake news is the news that comes out of the White House. Now, I'm going to go to you, Dom Giordano. You're a host on a station that is basically positioned, I don't know how overtly, but it's positioned, and that goes back to what I said before about today's media targets audiences based upon identity and political persuasion. Your station is positioned as a conservative station. Most of the personalities are conservative. How do you deal, because I know you're an educator and I know that you are in your heart a very objective, truthful man. How do you deal with balancing the objectives of playing to what's called in radio the P1 audience and your own observation of what is obviously a situation, as pointed out by Bill Press, by John, good stuff comes out and bad stuff comes out, just as it has been with every presidency or every dog catcher elected in this world. How do you deal with a time when the positioning of the medium that you're working for is don't play Led Zeppelin on a Peter, Paul, and Mary station?
I'm going to steal that line right there. Well, first, thanks to Hillsdale for having me. I broadcast my show in their state-of-the-art radio studio. Michael told me that. Everything was that. And it also had a shower in a bathroom 3 feet away from me. First time to talk radio show. So you guys have to come here if you're in media and do something from here. It's fascinating. So in answer to your question, and you kind of gave us a little tease of it a while ago, for conservatives, particularly during the election, particularly in the early stages with Trump, there was all-out warfare. I speak of myself, and I think I am a conservative, and I've been on with a lot of these guys. They may think that. And there were any number of things where I thought, finally, the true Trump people early on are going to sour on this guy. And some of them were in Iowa, some of them were later on, that you just can't say the sorts of things about McCain, et cetera. So there was, as I said, a pitched battle between conservatives, not never Trumpers per se, and the true Trump people early on. Now at this point, Michael, in answer to your question, a lot of it is whatever Trump does, branding fake news or other faux pas, or the problem I have with the president is stylistic, but I think it gets into what I like in a politician. It's mangled. I like people that are opinionated, can even be controversial, but are buttoned up in the fact pattern that we're debating versus all over the place. So what I see, though, is an overreaction by the media. And that's where the defense of Trump often comes in. Brian Ross is the latest villain in this, and the View gang, sorry for that, the View women, that were celebrating prematurely about Flynn when the facts don't take us there. So what I would say is, I can speak for the other two hosts, but mostly myself, this is on a point by point with Trump, and often what we're going after is the overreaction. In other words, going after him and savaging him even on things that are obvious and being patient with it. But there's an impatience here where people are throwing around drugs and dementia, and they don't like Melania's Christmas decorations. I think it's kind of a mistake to be going after Melania Trump, of all people here. And that's where the tension comes in every day. And that's why I don't feel talk radio is in this statement where you know what the talking point's going to be. Fox and Friends, I get the criticism. But talk radio in general, with a couple of national exceptions, you're seeing people wrestle with this. And I'll admit, it is hard in that atmosphere to be too critical of Trump. But there is criticism provoked by how over the top the opposition is.
Thank you. Janet Parshall, let's approach this topic, and you can react to everything that you've heard. Adding to it, what is the Christian and secular news talk perspective on this topic?
Yeah, hugely important question. First of all, thank you very much, and thanks to Hillsdale College. And you have to have sympathy for this man. Put a bunch of talkers on a panel, it's like herding cats. So thank you for the way you're handling this.
Thank you.
When you started out with the question, that was very important. You said, when you hear the words fake news, what goes through your mind? And I'm looking at this from a colloquial perspective, the populist perspective, because if we're really going to be effective in our line of work, while we're called talkers, in order to be really good, we have to be listeners. So what are our listeners saying back to us? What are they telling us? Are we discerning and picking up what they're saying? So when my listeners, for example, hear fake news, what they hear is the being in absentia, words like integrity, objectivity, truthfulness, verifiableness, worthiness. And we saw it exemplified here just in a few minutes, that it defaults down to an argument ad hominem, where you go after a particular person. I don't think that serves the culture well, regardless of where you happen to sit on the political spectrum. So for me, the Christian perspective, as you said, is I would rather, and you said something brilliant. You said we have to be careful that we don't seek victory at the expense of truth. What I've observed, just from my little corner of the world, is that there are some people so hungry for victory, be it political, be it policy, be whatever it is, they are willing to sacrifice anything and, quite frankly, anyone to get to where they want to. It's a kind of postmodern situational ethics, that the end is so important that any means is justifiable to get you where you want, even if it's the abdication of truth. So that's particularly burdensome for me. We can't get out ahead of the story. Dom, you brought up the idea of Brian Ross. That man lost control of objectivity. He got out ahead of the story. Feed the beast. You talk about the 24/7 mandate to get the information out there, but you also mentioned the sensitivity to time. We have to make sure we can verify the facts and not get out ahead of the story, because in so doing, and here's the big challenge for all of us, we lose credibility. From Quinnipiac to Harvard to NBC to Wall Street Journal, poll after poll after poll says that there has been a marked decline in trusting the media. How much of that is because we troubled our own house and we inherited the wind?
Do you find, because the word Christian has the connotation of morality, that there's a major element of morality beyond just truth? That there is a debate within those in the Christian media as to how the pursuit of morality is heightened in this era of Trump?
Well, I think, and that's a very astute question, Michael. I think what we're talking about, and boy, this just comes around again and again and again, particularly in Washington, this is a question of character from where I sit. So how do you handle when somebody criticizes you? Do you turn around and you return fire back again? You shouldn't do that if you're the president. You shouldn't do that if you're Jim Acosta doing the White House briefing. So it's a question of character. If a soft answer can turn away wrath, then we need to figure out how we negotiate facts without coming to pick a fight with somebody. So the character issue is ever before us, I think, and what we're seeing is a degradation of character. Add to that culturally all of the allegations now of sexual harassment, and we are seeing a coarseness in our culture like we've never seen before. I take that as a personal challenge. I don't know that I would call myself a journalist. I call myself an opinion maker. I am an astute student of journalism. But in order to raise the standard, to raise the bar, I think we do have to discuss these character issues. This is what happened, objective fact. What would have been the better response? Teaching moment for us as talkers.
Very well said. One of the things I find in my own career, when the word journalism comes up, or journalist, I say the best I can do is to try to be journalistic, as opposed to being a journalist. I'm journalistic. Okay, now we've established just how intense the impact of Donald Trump has been on the national discussion. And the impact of Donald Trump has been on, back to what I originally said, media being commercially minded, targeting audiences, giving them what they want for the sake of victory and the ratings, not necessarily a greater truth of what's best for the country. Joe Madison, how do you deal with the just heavy presence of Trump in everything that is said in this pop cultural arena of American media? It is pop cultural. Do you try to escape from it? Do you say to yourself, more Trump? And I see faces on the panel are all going, yes, you know, what else is there to talk about? Can you comment to that point?
Well, first of all, to answer your question directly, I would imagine all of us, if we're honest, but I'll speak for myself, when I wake up at 3:30 or 4 o'clock in the morning, the first thing I do is turn on the television, and the first thing I ask, what the hell has he said or done or tweeted now? And I think that's what most of my listeners have come to do. What has he said? And that sometimes creates a problem because, let me give you an example. I walked in today prepared to do an interview with Senator Cory Booker, who wanted to talk about a bill he's introduced for environmental injustice as well, and everybody's looking at me, what does that mean? What does environmental injustice mean? Well, it means that in some very poor, rural, and even urban communities, there's toxic waste, there's lead in, I forget the number of cities that stretch beyond Flint. I'm not trying to bore you, but the reality is we all want clean air, we all want clean water. I don't care if you're a Republican or a Democrat. And then quite candidly, nobody wanted to talk about it because whatever happened with Flynn or whatever happened with the lawyer who we don't know who wrote the tweet. We don't know if Trump wrote the tweet or the lawyer wrote it. It dominated it. And so it's very difficult, Mike, to then bring issues that really transcend our politics. I don't care if you're conservative or liberal sitting up here, but if John and I want to talk about toxic water, I bet you in his community there is toxic waste, and then we can't get it through. We can't get it through because he has dominated. It's like a wolf pack. We all go for it. Now, you said something about character. I was always taught there's a difference between character and reputation. Character is a combination of qualities that you possess. Reputation is what people think about you. There's a difference. So what we deal with mostly is his reputation. What is the man's character? And it boils down to we don't know if he's telling the truth. We don't know if he's lying. We don't know who's telling the truth. I will also say something else. You bring up morality. Morality. Okay, so who's more moral now? Roy Moore or the women who are accusing Roy Moore? Who's telling the truth? Are the women telling the truth, or is Roy Moore telling the truth? Is John Conyers telling the truth? Or the women who accused him telling the truth? He just retired today. I mean, retired immediately. So the question of morality is an extremely important one.
Well, one thing
I would close, I'm sorry, just one last point, and I'll make it 30 seconds. I think what is happening with our discussion, at least my sense is, it's not so much our politics. I think there's a cult factor that has developed. It's almost like a cult. Your leader, your religious leaders, and we've seen this with some ministers and preachers, and they can't say or do anything wrong. It's almost like a cult following. And that's what worries me more than anything else.
A number of things that you've said worry me, and I'll play for a moment here. If you'll indulge me, I'll be the 8th panelist. I would say if I were a panelist that, from my perspective, observing talk radio across the country, there has been a swing in the last 5 years toward stations realizing, not necessarily executing, but realizing that local talk radio is something that can be a major factor in preserving the role of the local radio station. That's one thing a local radio station can do, and that is serve its local community with local issues. I mean, the world does not center on Donald Trump in Washington, even though it's fascinating. So there have been more local hosts, at local radio stations all around the country, percentage-wise. We track this over the last 5 years. But unfortunately, based on a point that Joe brought up, they're all obsessed with talking about Donald Trump. As a result, the role of the media in local communities where the real action is happening. I mean, local small cities are hotbeds of corruption. And local corrupt politicians and business leaders are getting away with murder because the watchdogs, every town had its watchdog. The watchdog is playing to the crowd. They want to hear about Trump. And I'm not saying as much in your case because you're a local host, but you're dealing with a major region. But the rest of you are, for the most part, quite national in scope. But local hosts have to say, what's my responsibility here? Am I going to throw my little opinion? When I ask them, they go, well, I present the local perspective on it. But that, to me, is a bit of a cop-out, although I understand, again, it's a business, and it does play to numbers. Now, John, you have had... You're going to respond, but bear with me. I basically have the situation strategized as I'm going along. And your face and reactions as I'm reading everybody are just bursting with all kinds of potential. So I'm going to ask you a question. You can add to it what you want, but I don't want you to answer it. I want to talk to Scot Bertram. He's the only one who has not spoken yet. But I'm going to ask you the question now. This is a tease. And you'll answer it after we follow up with Scott. The question's going to be, and this is, I think you deserve a little time for this because I really want you to do some soul searching. What would you do if you woke up one day and you found out that something happened that proved beyond doubt that you have been wrong in your support of Donald Trump and that he was just a terrible guy who has done terrible things? How would you handle it? Don't answer. Now, Scott, let's go to you. We're going to get back to you. Scott, and right after these words from Scot Bertram. Scott, you deal with young broadcasters. What do you tell them? What do you tell them they're facing going into the media in 2017? How do you deal with all of these issues in terms of molding young minds that are just entering this business?
Something I wanted to get to, Dom had mentioned this, and it feeds into your question, which is, conservative hosts, liberal hosts, there's no script, there's no talking points. Earlier this summer, all the Salem hosts were here at Kirby Center to do their shows. Hugh was here, Dennis Prager was here, Mike Gallagher was here, Michael Medved was here, Sean Hannity was actually here on a different day when I was here helping all of them. And there is a thought out there that all these hosts are the same and all these hosts have the same talking points and they have the script. Every single one of those hosts ran their show differently. Every single one of those hosts produced the show differently. They took their cues from different places. They worked with their producers differently. They were different from top to bottom. And so I came back and was talking to my students about how everyone's different. Everyone prepares different ways. Everyone argues different ways. Some people are going to be louder. Some people are going to be screamers. Some people are going to be more cerebral, you might say. And so, when I work with them on the shows they do, and not all the shows that we have on the station are political in nature. We have some that are non-political explicitly. But 30, 40% of the shows try to focus on politics, Michigan-based or national-based. And I really just tell them, think for yourself. I can hear, when students are doing shows and they're parroting talking points or they're repeating something they've heard elsewhere. What I want them to do is to read, research, and make their own arguments, construct your own arguments. What are your strongest points? And I also tell them, what are your opponent's strongest points? And how do you refute them? Why are they wrong? Why are their best arguments wrong? And so I want them to think for themselves and to have a show that is able to both make their arguments well and sort of anticipate the arguments that opponents might make as well. How do they respond? Do you find yourself sometimes having difficulty teaching this against the pressure of the outside world? Sort of like Little League baseball players scratching themselves and spitting? No scratching or spitting is allowed in the studio, first of all. No, they're open. And, they're at an age, 18 to 22 or so, where a lot of them grew up on terrestrial radio, and a lot of them still listen to terrestrial radio, whether it be Rush or Hugh or whomever. But these podcasts now are becoming very large, and where we are in Hillsdale, penetration from stations isn't all that great. So they're listening online or listening to podcasts, and so they're getting a lot of different viewpoints, and they're hearing a lot of different ways to do shows. And I think when I do talk to them about trying to structure their show in a way that makes sense, where's your beginning? Where's your middle? Where's your end? How do you convince listeners to stick with you through your points and through your arguments? I think they're receptive to it. I kind of leave our hosts alone for the first 3-4 shows, let them figure things out. Then we sit down and talk about, what can you do better? How do you structure this better? How do you make the show more interesting, more informative, more entertaining?
Thank you, Scott. Okay, John, you're on.
I hope the audience sticks with you, despite my lead-in.
It's a great lead-in. Well, if I were to get up one day and there was evidence of what you said, I would be shocked because I know the man, and so it would defy all the history that I have. But look, you can't raise 5 great children, build a $10 billion company, and then sit there and say the man is of low character. Those don't wash. As far as Janet said earlier about his character, what people mistake for character or morality is you just don't like the guy's style. I get it. You don't like his style. You don't like his tone. You don't like his tweets. You don't like how he raises his hands and how he goes, if he's attacked, he fires back. You just don't like the guy. I get it. But that has nothing to do with his policies or how he's become successful. You got to remember, Trump came into this campaign. When we joined this campaign, Trump was at 1%. He was a joke. Nobody took him seriously. Now, I come from the perspective, Joe mentioned the word cult. Okay, I'm not sure what that means in this instance. I'm a true believer in the policies of this president. And he took on Republican orthodoxy head on. Pro-gay rights, right? You got to go back and remember. Control the borders, pro-immigration. He attacked these stupid trade deals we have, open borders, HAFTA, TPP, U.S. workers getting screwed, jobs going overseas, wages down. He became popular because of the policies that he was espousing. He also said he would protect the United States social contract net, not cut Medicaid, not cut Medicare. You got Paul Ryan the other day. Well, after we pass the tax cut, I'm going to reform welfare. What the hell does that mean? The object of the Trump presidency is to make the country prosperous and rich. One of the other policies, get out of these wars so that we can then pay for food stamps, CHIP, Medicaid, Medicare, Social Security. So he has a clear agenda that everybody seems to get garbled because they don't like his style. And as far as Roy Moore is concerned and fake news, sure.
You didn't answer my question. You didn't answer my question.
I would be shocked.
You did no. I asked you the question based on the fact that you'd be shocked. So
and then
give me a 30-second answer. Well, give me a 10-second answer, then a 30-second answer. First question: is it possible that you could be shocked and would be wrong?
Sure.
And I'm going to ask Bill Press the same question.
Sure.
So okay. So you do realize you're infallible. You're not infallible. Because I worry about that all the time. I always say to myself, my God, I may not be right. We live in a world where we have to have an opinion pretty quickly, and I'm not so sure I'm always right. As a matter of fact, a lot of times I read old articles I've written, I look at old videos I've done. One of the problems with being in the digital age is everything's recorded. I wince, I say, oh my gosh. I like to talk about all my predictions that come true. I don't like to know that anybody can go on Google and see me say some pretty stupid stuff.
Can I interrupt just a second? I do want, because John and I do this every Friday.
Oh, it's getting hot. Somebody interrupted.
But let me answer your question about cult. Now, here's what I mean by a cult. Anytime a man goes on radio and says, I can shoot somebody in the middle of Fifth Avenue.
Oh, that was a metaphor.
Excuse me, I didn't interrupt you. As soon as, when a metaphor or not, and everybody doesn't always catch a metaphor, when somebody says, I can go in the middle of Fifth Avenue and shoot somebody in this day and age and not lose any supporter, that's a cult mentality.
Good point.
Now, and let me make one other point. You said he got popular through his public policy. You're right. I'll give John that argument. You're absolutely right. Let's get rid of Social Security. Let's change Medicare and a whole bunch of other public policy issues. I'm not going to take that argument from you. But let me tell you what my audience thinks his popularity came from. When he sat there and accused Barack Obama of being born in Kenya, and then said he was going to send detectives to Hawaii, and said that the birth certificate was fake, came back, didn't find anything, but wait a minute, then turned around last week and said it again, that he wasn't born in the United States. That's how he became, in my audience's mind, that's what really shot him up beyond the true conservatives that we have.
Okay, as moderator, we've had two interesting points, and I applaud both of you for addressing it well. Bill Press, what if you woke up tomorrow and the stock market's booming and Main Street is booming? I do want to point out, mainstream doesn't necessarily boom anymore when the stock market does, and that's troubling. That being said, Bill, do you ever wonder, like, if suddenly we never go to war, everything is de-escalated, the Kim Jong-un thing never comes to some type of negative fruition, prosperity booms, America's great again, what would you do?
I would hope I would give him, I would think and I would hope I would give him credit for the good things that he has done. I'm a Democrat, I'm a liberal, I make no bones about it. I'm a talk show host. I'm a progressive, if you want to use that word, which I hate. I'm a liberal talk show host, okay? I supported George W. Bush and his immigration, comprehensive immigration reform, because I thought he had the right approach. Barack Obama tried the same thing, didn't work. I wrote a book at the end of the Obama presidency called Buyer's Remorse, how Barack Obama disappointed progressives. So I think I've proven that I'm capable of criticizing my guys or applauding people on the other team when they're wrong. But I have to say, John, just for the record, and I want to make one other point if I can when I have the mic. For the record, yeah, I don't like Donald Trump's style. I think the American people deserve better in terms of just the way he handles himself as president. But that's not my problem with Donald Trump. I don't like the fact that he tried to gut the first national health insurance plan that we've ever had. I don't like the fact that he's trying to get rid of the Dreamers. I don't like the fact that he pulled out of the Paris Accords. I don't like his tax cut, a permanent tax cut for big business and a temporary cut for individuals. So it's the policies that I disagree with, and I think that's what this is all about. Democrat or Republican, we focus on their policies.
So you're saying, Bill, I'll let you get to your second point, but you're saying that there is a policy discussion in all of this hoopla that does provide a series of choices to Americans.
I don't talk about his hair or his jowls or his whatever, bags under the eyes. I talk about his policy.
Okay, real quick, your other point.
Real quickly, the other point. I just have to say this because I thought this panel was all going to be about media in the age of journalism. I just want to say, as heretical as it may sound, I think Donald Trump has been great for journalism. It's challenging, it's tougher, but at the same time, we've never had so much to talk about. I remember the dog days of summer when you'd be thinking about, oh my God, how am I going to fill 3 hours or 2 hours? And Donald Trump gives us material up the gazoo every single day. Secondly, I think he has triggered the best investigative journalism we've seen in this country since the days of Watergate.
Now, I see that we have two people reacting. The first one was Dom. I'm not going to forget about you, Hugh. Dom, your reaction.
Hey, Bill, I admire you greatly, have done stuff with you, but deep down, you don't sense that with Trump, it's the vehemence is driven by more than the policies. The policies, he hasn't exactly followed through on, I think, as a conservative, and he doesn't articulate them well, and he's all over the place with them. I think there's an irrational thing here, and it goes back to, again, this guy shouldn't have been president. How did this happen? And I think when you look at Mrs. Clinton as a candidate, when you look at Mitch McConnell, you can see, I know with my listeners, that every bit as much Trump is an antidote to coming here to Washington to break up Mitch McConnell and the boys, every bit as much as the policies. I will give credit, though, of something I like. He did make trade and these things that eat away at me at NAFTA. He did make them things that we talk about and that these people in rural America are articulating, the opiate crisis and all. Even though he doesn't articulate it correctly, through the force of his personality, he did get at something that's really important and wasn't sexy before.
Yeah, quickly, okay, I want to take it from you. I agree with him on NAFTA and TPP, and I said so.
Okay, let's go to Hugh, and then Janet, I'm going to come to you.
Michael, I got a question from online. Is this streaming, or I responded to Niall Ferguson from
streaming.
The Hill that you're taping it and to look at talkersmagazine.com later?
Yes,
or talkers.com.
yeah, we will process and cut out everything that we find objectionable that doesn't agree with my point of view.
Media. I wanted to make 2 points. One about the age of Trump. Ajit Pai was my guest on MSNBC on Saturday. The biggest threat to AM radio is not Donald Trump or Never Trumpers. It is the fact that ground signal distortion is ruining the signal of every AM station in America. And anyone who loves talk radio needs to talk to the FCC about allowing us to power up within our guidelines, because it's handheld devices, it's a great deal of electronic disturbance. So that Bill and I used to work, we've known each other for 28 years. We did news, we've been friends for 28 years. He's been wrong for 28 years. But we would work on AM 640, a clear channel in Los Angeles. In 1989 we began, and we would get calls from Mississippi. Those clear channel things are dinosaurs, and they're killing the signal. And I guarantee you this morning in Los Angeles, with Ventura County on fire, people are listening to AM 1070 for the local news about which highways were closed and where they could evacuate and which schools were open. And we got to save AM radio. And Michael, what you do for that, thank you. I appreciate that, because AM radio needs saving. Here's what Donald Trump has done that is better than anything else we can talk about. He taught every political figure to go anywhere and talk to anyone at any time about anything. That's why he won the nomination. He flooded the zone on CNN, NBC, MSNBC. He did all but one debate. His only argument throughout the primaries was with Fox News. He would go anywhere to talk with anyone. So I'm very proud of the fact that 2 weeks ago, Secretary Clinton came on my show, and I had negotiated for weeks to get her on, and we agreed to 30 minutes, and I had to limit it to the book. There's a lot in the book. At the end of 32 minutes, she said to me, "I'm having fun, Hugh, let's keep going." And she admitted that she ought to have done conservative media. I believe that if she had done conservative media, she would have won the presidency. And so I think what President Trump has shown, that it is good to get out of your bubble and to talk to anyone about anything at any time, and all media ought to be thankful for that.
Especially since she's a conservative. Janet, I have 2 questions for you. Question 1, John mentioned get past the style and get into the substance of the policies. How important is it for people that are in positions of power, such as the President of the United States or the Chairman of the Federal Reserve, who can screw the whole stock market up by a misstatement, where the words have a lot of meaning? How important is it for the President of the United States not to be loose with his lips?
Well, I think it goes to the idea of deportment. We expect a certain style, a characteristic to subscribe to our leaders for many reasons, not the least of which is I think we tend to look at these people, and I'm going to use an arcane idea here, as role models. We used to look at sports figures as role models and political leaders as role models. And, well, the bigger they are, the harder they fall, as the saying goes. But I've heard a couple of interesting things that really go to your question, which is this idea that in the fog of war, it's really about policy. I'd like to believe that, but objective numbers tell me otherwise. Harvard University, of all places, took a look at the press coverage of George W. Bush and Bill Clinton in their first 100 days. And the negative to positive for both Clinton and Bush was 60 to 40. For Trump, it has been 80 to 20. So there's a particular vitriol in the press. I'm going to go to the title of this panel. It's Media and Journalism in the Age of Trump. We default to Trump. I want to go back to journalism and media here. And I think that while you have issues with the president, the question on the table for us as people who are in the media is, How do we react and how do we handle all of this? So, Joe, you said something very important, and it ties into something that Bill said earlier, which is if, in fact, policy is the issue, and I would hope so, because policy should, in theory, outlast any politician, right? Politicians come and go. If they don't retire themselves, they're unelected, or by constitutional restraint, they can't go beyond 8 years. So I learned something when I came to Washington a long time ago, and that is you have a choice of perspective. You can look at somebody as an 80% friend and a 20% enemy, or you can look at them as a 20% friend and an 80% enemy. So Joe talked about the idea of clean water. That's something where if you push personality aside and you really go to policy, you have the opportunity to have substantive and important discussions. Hugh talked about Hillary coming on his program. That's an indictment for some of us, and that is, what are we doing to open the welcome mat and the door of opportunity? I am an all-comers policy person. I welcome anybody in the marketplace of ideas. In fact, I'll quote Tevye from Fiddler on the Roof. You I like, your ideas I wouldn't give you a kopeck for, but you I like. I might not necessarily like the person I have on the show because of their worldview, but I want to hear their worldview. Abraham Lincoln said, when you prepare your case, and this goes to something Scott said, you spend 20% of your time preparing your argument and 80% of your time preparing your opponent's argument. I want to know what other people believe and where they're coming from. Quite frankly, it makes me a better apologist for what I believe and why I believe it. So I'm wondering if we shouldn't get out of our boxes a little bit, be more willing to go boldly into the marketplace, talk to people we wouldn't normally hang out with, see where they're coming from, examine their ideas. I happen to believe that my ideas are built on solidity, but I don't think that my ideas are going to crumble if I talk to somebody else who holds an antithetical worldview. In fact, they might challenge me to either change my thinking or to become even more committed to my perspective.
And I'll get to your answer, your comment in a second. And often there isn't one right and one wrong. Sometimes politics and disagreement is based on whose shoes you're standing in. Mm-hmm. It's just a civilized way of battling out differences for the piece of the pie that we call the Commonwealth. Right. And we lose sight of that, and that's why sometimes compromise is an honorable thing. Joe, you had a comment?
No, I just wanted to, I found it interesting, this 80-20, since I've been, in Washington all these years, what I've learned is that there, and it's a book that William Clay Sr., congressman, the former congressman from St. Louis, wrote. You know, he said that in politics there are no permanent friends or permanent enemies, only permanent interests. And therein lies what I think we're gotten away from is whose interest is being dealt with when it comes to public policy. There's something else. My perspective is entirely different than everybody on this panel. Why? Because my experience is different. There's certain commonalities we may have. It might be education. It might be the fact. Let me tell you the question I asked on my show. I think the slogan, "Make America Great Again," bothers me. And I'll tell you why. All my life, I've been told America is the greatest country on the planet. When did it stop? So why do we have to say again? Now, when I asked African Americans, what do they mean, make it great again? Since when? Most of my audience will say, oh, you talk to conservatives, not conservatives, I shouldn't say, you talk to some. It'll go, oh, it was 1964, 1965. That perspective, that's my perspective. And what happens is we don't share or listen to other people's perspective. I mean, I got to be very honest with you. You talk about work outside, he should get outside his bubble. Tell him to come on the Joe Madison show. Tell him to go on some black talk radio. You're talking about, and I would tell Bernie Sanders. Don't you think he didn't get a pass? Bernie Sanders came on my show. I mean, it was like pulling teeth, Bill, to get him to come on the show. And then one of the questions that killed him, I said, look, if you become president of the United States, will you apologize for slavery? You know, he couldn't answer it. Didn't answer it. Wouldn't answer it. And it cost him big-time vote. So it's, I'm sorry? What did he say? He started, hey, you know what he started doing? He started lecturing me on the history of slavery. Excuse my French, but I know. But he learned from that experience because he ended up in a panel discussion in Harlem, and obviously one of my listeners heard the exchange and asked him the same question directly, and he said, "Oh yeah, I apologize as soon as I get elected." But that's again. So I would say, to go back to your point about the age of Trump, Donald Trump and his folk ought to come on a show where there are different perspectives, and and sell your position. You may not be successful at it, but if Hillary would have won, if she'd have gone on conservative talk radio, maybe some of the conservatives would convince more African Americans to vote for him if they come on our show. We are so into our boxes, and we're not dealing with issues, and that's what bothers me about the age of Trump, and it didn't just start with Trump. We are in our boxes, and we're not dealing with commonality. And I'll go back and end where I started. When, you look at LeVar Ball, we tried to talk about him today, the father, who's running around, talking about, oh, I'm going to pull my son from UCLA. Now, what's the commonality we all have? Who in the hell would pull their sons from a full-time basketball scholarship because your kid was too stupid not to steal something in China? That's what's not happening. And we can't get to that because style, and it is about style. Ministers have styles. That's why you go to a certain church. You like his style. Style is real, John.
No, you have style.
You're damn right.
Okay, Dom Giordano. This is fascinating, and thank you, Joe. And I found what you said to be very, very moving, and I personally agree that perspective is everything, and it leads to respect. And respect really is vital for a democracy to continue to exist. Respect. So let's talk about a bigger issue that all media and all journalism is subject to, and that is the health of the First Amendment. Dom, do you think that the First Amendment is stronger, less strong? The state of the First Amendment, which I'm always concerned about, as a result of the turbulence that journalism is going through. Hugh Hewitt mentioned that this is a great day for media, and I think Hugh said that this has stimulated investigative journalism, or Bill said it. Again, I wasn't wearing my glasses. I just see a white blur at the end of the table. And you probably see a white blur at this end of the...
What would happen? I was going to say, I
should have put you back there. It would have given better balance to my vision problems here. State of the First Amendment.
Oh, boy, after that. Okay. Well, I think the pockets of the First Amendment, college campuses, where I still teach a class, are under fire with I hate to use the term snowflakes, but that's what a lot of these kids are, and they're being egged on, and plug for Hillsdale, who does not do that. But the First Amendment is not under fire. Trump is not Mussolini. We're not dragging journalists out into the street. Jake Tapper comes on with me once a week. He's a Philly guy. Today said, boy, I don't even know what to start with. We have 8 or 9 different things, mainly thanks to Trump, to talk about today. There's no squelching of that. He said when he started his show, they were figuring out how are they going to fill an hour up. So I don't see any of that sort of stuff. It's way overdone. The First Amendment thing that I'm looking at today is the cake shop case. And the cake shop case, Janet, it just said that's right up here, I thought was a religious freedom thing. As a talk show host, I centered it on that a year or 2 ago, whatever it was. I see it more dramatically now because I had the experience, and I brought him back on, of a guy who is kind of a Nazi figure, not the bad kind of Nazis. He's just a mixed-up guy who named his kid Adolf Hitler.
Did you say not the bad kind of Nazi?
Yes. He's, all right, here you go, okay.
There's a small percentage of good Nazis like white witches.
Wait a minute. So wait a minute, he is not a good Nazi. He's a mixed up guy, though. He's not going to be goose-stepping in here.
Oh, he's
He names his
mentally
kid
ill.
Adolf Hitler, takes the kid to a ShopRite along with his wife to get a cake inscribed, "Happy birthday, Adolf Hitler," the legal name of his son. They say, as I would, "Get the hell out of here." And they don't serve him. Now, the people I had on that have national perspective, none of them have heard of that case. The reason you haven't heard of it is that's an unpopular guy, an unpopular opinion, and people are solidly with ShopRite. This poor baker in Colorado is getting these grandiose edicts about you're a public service. You have to do what the customer wants. Like hell, you're going to come in and tell me I'm going to put a Confederate flag on a birthday cake. Or I'm going to put something anti-Italian. Yeah, I love Degos or something. I'm not going to do that. And I think a business owner certainly has a right to do that. That's the First Amendment that's under fire, that you have people that are so politically correct, so driven, so misinformed, that they see this cake shop baker as a threat to something in our society that is non-existent. And I'll bring it back to Trump. Trump, in an instinctual way, or whoever gets in his ear, has a way of getting involved in one cultural hot button after another. Be it LeVar Ball, who's an ingrate, and that was the issue there, be it the NFL players with the knee, or any number of array of feuds. And I know that my listeners, whether it's right, wrong, or indifferent, are entertained by this. Part of it is entertainment. And they don't see Trump as a threat to the First Amendment or anything else, but a guy that's taking on these people that have been mocking them, laughing at them, showing disdain, and along the way, they're entertained by it.
Is there any media today, I'll let anybody jump in on this first hand up, is there any major media today that isn't primarily entertainment?
Well, when I first started in talk radio, a program director, and this was, and there are those who remember this, you had the fairness doctrine. So, you know, and that's out the window. And last year we brought up the fairness doctrine and Hugh jumped me. So I'm not going to bring it up this time. But there's some people now who are talking seriously about bringing back the fairness doctrine. I mean, there's some
If I may inject, that goes back to what Hugh said about saving AM radio, which I wanted to say, and then we'll get right back to your point, that AM radio doesn't need being saved because all radio is going the way of the internet. And I personally think, I don't speak officially, this is personally, that more people listen to AM radio now online, don't even know they are, than are listening to it on an AM radio set.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
But the program director came back from a conference with some consultants and said, we're going to start something now called infotainment. Infotainment. And started to lecture us about infotainment. Never heard the term. What is infotainment? And matter of fact, you may know him. Remember Michael Packer? He used to be a program. And so he said it's infotainment, that now all information has to be presented in an entertaining kind of way. And I'm not talking about variety show type infotainment, but I'm talking about what you were making reference to, as, you know, that people think it's entertainment, that this is a joke. But once again, that goes back to perspective. Your listeners may think it's entertaining for a group of black athletes at the NFL to take a knee. Well, let me tell you something. My folks don't think it's entertaining, because they're the ones that when they take that freaking uniform off and their number is not on that uniform, they're the ones that get jacked up by the police. So what is entertaining to one group of people may be real serious to another.
Well, can I just add, though, that there's nothing wrong, Joe, and you're one of the most entertaining guys, and I know you forever, in a natural style to be entertaining and informative. Trump doesn't always accomplish that. It gets mangled. Yeah, but that's what I strive for, and you certainly don't have to strive for it, I don't think. It's a natural. You're being, if I could speak for you for a moment, you are being you, and that is naturally informative, intelligent, elevated, but there's a hell of a lot of entertainment in there.
Okay, here. I'll give you here.
I'm going to get to you right after
How
this.
much?
Okay,
But
Bill?
first off,
Let Bill jump in now. Bill?
I just want to jump in a couple of points, because we're all bouncing around. First of all, I just got to say, Joe spoke about my experience. Just to speak to that 1 second. I grew up in a small town in northern Delaware. in a segregated town. Went to a white school, went to a white church, and the other school, the Negro school, we didn't call it that, was outside of town, a mile outside of town. And my father had a small business. He had a gas station. There were 3 gas stations in town. The other 2 gas stations wouldn't serve black people. My father did. My father served Irish, he served Italian, he served Polish, he served anybody who came there. And for him to turn them away for any reason, I think is the same as that baker turning that gay couple away in Denver. This is not First Amendment. This is the 14th Amendment. This is equal rights, I believe. If you're in public service, you're a business to serve the public, you serve the public, and you don't hide behind religion, what I would call a phony use of religion, to try to hide your basic biases or racism or homophobia.
Are you aware, though, that that's a vague concept, that you must decide who you want to do business with?
I don't think it's a vague concept at all. I saw a sign walking over here that said, "Love your neighbors," and at the bottom it said, "Without exception." I'll live by that rule. I don't think it's vague at all.
You mean you don't have bias against certain individuals? You don't want to do business with them just because you don't like them?
I'm just saying, if you're in business, if you have a bake shop, or if you have a gas station, or if you've got a laundry, whatever, then you are there to serve the public.
Bill, but I think here, the guy is not mistreating or not serving people that are gay that he knows that are gay. Isn't that the test? You're asking him to express something. How about Halloween? He doesn't want to be involved in Halloween. You're going to make him have to do Halloween?
He knew they were gay. What do you mean?
Okay, we got the point of this debate. Let's go to Hugh, and then I want Janet's input on this, because it's really a fascinating exercise in freedom, and it's that area where it gets nebulous.
And one quick point on entertainment.
Okay, quick point.
Okay, I came back to Washington to do Crossfire with Bob Novak and Pat Buchanan. Damn right it was entertaining. And you know what? I hope it was informative. I know it was informative. I hope it was also entertaining. I think we have to be entertaining.
Did you ever juice it up to make it more entertaining?
Hell yes. Yeah, I'd go after Novak.
No, but I mean, did you ever say to each other, hey, you do this, I'll do this?
No, we didn't do that. But
Okay.
both of us, Novak played all the time to the camera. All I'm saying is, let's not be too stodgy here, right? You want people to listen, and you want people to have fun listening and to learn something. And so there's nothing wrong with a little bit of entertainment in every show.
Hugh, grab it, Hugh, before somebody jumps in.
Everybody is concerned with ratings, even NPR and PBS. Nothing happens till somebody sells something, so we all have to be entertaining and not dull, or there will be no media and no one will watch anything. First Amendment response. I teach First Amendment. I teach it at Fowler School Live for 21 years. It's in fine shape. What Bill doesn't really believe in is coerced speech. If I had an hour with Bill, I could walk him around to why Jack Phillips ought to be left alone in Masterpiece Cake Shop. He serves same-sex couples. He does not wish to use his art to propagate a message with which he does not agree fundamentally. And we would hold that to be true, for example, for a devout Muslim who did not wish to make representations of Allah, which is forbidden by their faith. And therefore, the First Amendment has always had protections against coerced speech. They apply to Jack Phillips. I have no doubt he will win this case. The question is, and I'll give it to Janet, where do you draw the line?
Exactly. And I'm glad you brought up the issue of coerced speech, because it goes back to what you said, which is, you said your politics were the First Amendment. That really is the linchpin in this entire conversation. And so as we're sitting here having this conversation, what they're really arguing at the court is whether or not you can have something known as coerced speech. I don't care where you sit on the political spectrum. If we move to the day and age where the government said, rightly or leftly, this is what you have to say, every single one of us would stand up and object. And so that's what's really in the dock at the Supreme Court right now, is whether or not a governmental entity can coerce you to say something that you don't like. Nat Hentoff at the Village Voice said it beautifully. He said, free speech for thee, but not for me. So what's going on in our culture that you can't have somebody come to an Ivy League school unless somebody throws a brick through a window or starts a building on fire because you disagree with what you think is going to be the content of that individual's speech? How do you defeat a bad idea? With a better one. You don't silence speech you disagree with. You encourage more participators in the marketplace of ideas. What I've seen, and I find this an interesting juxtaposition. I was at a Big Ten university in the 1960s where they came in and disturbed our classroom, put black paint on their face, chanted anti-war slogans, and didn't let me get my lecture to get my grade for that semester because they were protesting the war. Okay. All I heard during the 1960s was protect free speech, protect free speech. I don't have to agree with the speech I hear, but as the old adage says, I have to agree 100% that you have the right to say it. And as talkers, that has to be a definer for who we are.
Well, it's the issue we deal with all the time. I'm the one who gave Al Franken, presented him with the Freedom of Speech Award, and then threw him off the stage halfway through his speech. That actually happened. And I'll spare you all the story, but it's my best one. Scott, how do you deal with
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Are you going to take it back, the award?
No. I just wanted him to get off the stage. You wouldn't.
No. I'm not talking about. I'm talking about with his, because that's an issue.
No, I don't take. He got the award based on that time. You know, you give the award, you live with the shame of not knowing that he was grabbing women.
So should these journalism societies take back Charlie Rose's?
I don't think so. My personal opinion is that you give an award, you live with it. You gave him the award. You're responsible for the way it was at that time, and you live with the shame of it, or just the fact that it happened, or just the fact that one of the great things we have in a bad syndrome of today's life is that there's a terrible plague of short-term attention span. People forget anyway. Just let it go. How do you handle the First Amendment now that you're working under a system where the Constitution is academically one of its pillars? Hillsdale College is known for its constitutional studies, and I'll push in a little direction. Do you find that there's a lot of misunderstanding about what the First Amendment means?
Some, but not a lot. Everybody gets a big packet before they do anything on the station, right? So what can you do? What can't you do? Why can't you do it? We're a non-commercial station by definition, so
I'm talking in a broader sense. Just an understanding, not among students, but of the human race about what freedom of speech per the First Amendment to the Constitution means. Because even in this discussion today, back to Janet and that discussion, some people don't know the difference between freedom to express religion or freedom from somebody forcing their religion on you. The thee and me is a terribly blurry area in the minds of many. To me, it's clear. To me, it's just the United States government, or the government does not have the right to censor you on expression unless a couple of exceptions. But I didn't, John could not have called me up and said, you're infringing on my First Amendment right by not inviting me to be on this panel. I would say, it's my panel, start your own. This panel is an extension of my First Amendment right to present what I consider to be a well-rounded group. And if somebody calls Hugh on the phone and says, I want to say so-and-so, and Hugh says, no, you're a jerk. I don't want you on. You sound too old, and I want young listeners. I'm not talking about that subject. I know it's important, but I'm not talking about it. Invariably, they're going to say, you're infringing on my First Amendment right. Well, no, that show is your First Amendment right. More so, it's Salem's First Amendment right.
Yep.
People don't understand this constantly.
We actually had that conversation in class last week because I was a producer in a former life. I was a call screener, and you get people who call and demand to be on the air because it's my right to be on the show. And you have to tell them that that's, in fact, not the case. It's my right to tell you can't be on the show. It's our show. Get your own show.
Right.
And so we discuss things like that, in class and at the station. I think partially because of what Hillsdale teaches, I have not had real problems with what the First Amendment is, what it means. I think the students have a really good understanding of what the First Amendment means and what it means to them as broadcasters.
Go ahead.
Can I give you a true story? You'll love this one. I knew him before he knew me. WWDB. All right, there we go. FM. I'm doing the show midnight to 5:30. 5:30. Oh my gosh. Midnight. Oh, yeah. Only black guy on the whole freaking show. I'm pulled, channel, whatever, the station. I'm pulled in by, what's his name, who owned it?
Chuck Schwartz.
Chuck Schwartz and Diane Raymond, and said, you cannot talk about black issues while you're on the air. Now, the question is for this panel. would you have fired me? Or and if I'd have said, excuse me, no. And they did. I mean, that's what they did. That's exactly, and in Philadelphia, after the neighborhood burned down. Moved, the move folk. Now, so I'm going to tell you what I did, First Amendment. Next morning, I interviewed Louis Farrakhan. The first hour. The second hour, I interviewed Ron Brown, who was running for chairman of the Democratic National Committee, to show the difference between it. The next morning, Jerry was with me. I was called in and fired. Now, whose First Amendment is being violated? So it goes back to what you said. Charles Schwartz owned the station.
Yeah, he had the right to be stupid.
So what? No. Well, so
I consider that stupid.
So the question then is, if I went to the Supreme Court, whose case would prevail? Charles Schwartz, who's the owner, or Joe Madison, who was fired because he exercised First Amendment? I don't. I'm asking.
But it's a clear-cut answer, Hugh.
Well,
yeah, absolutely.
Tom Likas was fired from KFI in 1991 when he had the largest share in Los Angeles because of Cox Broadcasting.
Yeah.
But I would have fired you for being nutty enough to do 27 and a half radio week. Did you do that?
I do 4 now. But,
Yeah. All right.
But I do get.
I want to bring this to a conclusion, and I'd like.
But what I'm saying, Michael, is and I'm very serious about this. So, where's the? Does this cloud the First Amendment? Because what you're saying, it's Schwartz because he owns it.
Well, he is the one who, in the capitalistic system and an entrepreneur system, he is the one who has ownership of that property. He owns the platform.
So ownership and capitalism supersedes First Amendment constitutional right?
It's not a constitutional right for you to have a platform. It's a constitutional right for you to have an opinion without the government interfering. It doesn't guarantee you a soapbox. You could, as a remedy, claim that he's not serving the public and oppose his reassignment of the license. That's a way. But no, you do not have the right to claim First Amendment, that a newspaper doesn't run your letter or that your employer doesn't.
I was first told, now, and I'm asking this for
I'm answering you. Why are you not taking the truth as the answer?
No, not just you.
But what I'm saying to you is the truth.
But I was told you can't talk about black folk.
That's just like I was once told I can't play Peter, Paul, and Mary.
No. Peter, Paul, and Mary.
No. It's artistic expression.
No.
You hold. Let me make this point. I'll let you have the second. Artistic expression is equal to political opinion under the First Amendment. There have been they put elephant dung on the wall in the Brooklyn Museum, and there was and taxpayer money was involved in that. I don't remember the details of the case, but it comes to mind. And there was a First Amendment argument about it. What is art? And who has the right to decide what is artistic expression? Hugh, you're a scholar on this subject. Am I in the right?
Unless the government told your owner to fire you, there is no First Amendment violation. If the government told your owner to fire you, you would have a civil rights cause and you would have a First Amendment. But if the government's not involved, there is no constitutional issue, period.
And it's not I'm saying that's right. I said he was stupid because it was bad business. It was bad policy. It wasn't smart. But this goes on all the time. And the reason I made the remark about the music is in my early days when I was in music radio, and I was in a kind of radio where the DJs were the curators, we picked the music, and the format was called freeform. And if you don't think there were battles, I was prepared for my 35-year career in talk radio by the battles I went through my 15-year career in music radio. I was a pioneer in that arena. And the battles were fierce because the music related to lifestyle. It related to whether you were hip or unhip, whether you were cool or uncool. It even related to politics. That's where I cut my teeth on that. And artistic expression, Lenny Bruce. Look at the history. Howard Stern. It's not just, serious issues. It could be dirty words. It's fascinating. And yes.
I think to sum it up, many of us in the radio business are they have the opportunity to drop me when the agreement is up and not get renewed. The government is not involved in that.
Exactly. No, nor was the government involved in whether Colin Kaepernick could take a knee. It was the Player Association union contract that was at play in that. And that's why a lot of people felt that Trump had no right to be in that discussion. And then some people feel Trump has a right to be in every discussion because of the culture. I'm going to spare everybody the obligation of doing a final statement because that'll take a half hour. But I want John Frederick to make the final statement. And Frederick, I want you to give us an honest answer. And don't be too long, but just come up with something cool. Who is more entertaining?
Joe's cool.
Joe's everybody here is
Joe's
cool. And everybody in this audience is cool. I've been looking at all your faces and you seem interested. If not, I would have just called it off a half hour ago. But you're not that interested where we're going to go another half hour. We'll be at it. We'll be done in 3 minutes based on whether John is able to really
be succinct.
I want you to be the kicker. Who's more entertaining, you or Donald Trump? And who cares about being entertaining more in terms of when he gets up in the morning and he sets his tone for the day?
Oh, if you listen to my show, I'm much more entertaining than the president. There's no question about that. But look, he has changed things. There's no question about it. Pre-Trump, those that do, like Joe and I and Bill, that go on in the morning. In fact, Bill and I were at the Philadelphia convention, I believe, by each other at Crampton spot. We would prepare in the evening and then go to bed and get up at 3:30, whatever we do. I don't do that now. There is no point in preparing anything until you get up at 3 a.m. because the first thing you do is you turn on your Twitter and see what the hell he's tweeted out today, and that dominates everything. So there's no question that this administration and this president has changed that. I do want to make one comment, though, about Bernie Sanders, Bill. He came on my show 3 times, and he allowed me to spend the day with him in Iowa. That's probably why he got beat. So I just want to throw that out. Probably shouldn't have done that. But as far as the First Amendment is concerned, I think this president has done more to encourage people's First Amendment rights than anything I've ever seen. The day he got inaugurated on a Friday, the next day on a Saturday, there was a Million Women's March, and he hadn't said anything or done anything. So they were all expressing their First Amendment rights. And so I think that this president, although he tangles with the press and he gets into it with April Ryan and John and Acosta and other people, I think he has encouraged everybody to get involved and the media to take a proactive stance in some areas. And I happen to think that is a great thing.
Nice kicker. Okay. Hugh Hewitt, Bill Press, Scot Bertram, John Fredericks, Janet Parshall, Joe Madison, and Dom Giordano. Excellent job, guys. Thank you.